In the shadow of the towering colonnades of St. Peter's Basilica, beneath the weight of centuries of tradition and authority, unfolds a story unlike any papal chronicle in modern memory. A final chapter, not of closure, but of culmination. A chapter written in silence and service, in weary footsteps and whispered prayers. It's the story of a man born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, an Argentinian son of immigrants, who rose not to seize power, but to surrender to it in the service of others. A man who entered the most iconic office in the Catholic world, not to be revered, but to remind the world what reverence truly means. And now, as the pages of his papacy near their final turns, the world is witnessing something rare and quietly revolutionary. The human soul of a pope who refused to be anything but himself. Pope Francis did not arrive at the papacy with a hunger for control or acclaim. In fact, he was surprised by it, even reluctant. His papal journey began with a gesture of humility, not grandeur. When he stepped onto the balcony in 2013, he didn't raise his arms in triumph. He asked for the people to pray for him. That one moment told the world everything about the kind of pope he would be: disarmingly humble, unmistakably grounded, and profoundly aware of the humanity behind the title. Over the years, this authenticity did not fade, it deepened. As the global stage grew louder and more polarized, Francis remained rooted in quiet gestures that spoke louder than proclamations. To understand this final chapter, you have to look beyond the speeches and into the everyday decisions that shaped his life. He chose to live not in the papal palace, but in a small room at the Casa Santa Marta guest house. He didn't separate himself from staff and visitors. He greeted them in hallways, at mealtimes, in chance encounters. His office didn't tower above. It sat level with everyone else. Even in private, he kept a simple cross, a worn Bible, and a handful of handwritten notes from people who had poured their hearts out to him, and to whom he often responded personally. These were not grand gestures for show. They were consistent threads in the fabric of his papacy, a pattern of presence over power. Behind the scenes, those closest to him describe a man who carried the burden of leadership with sincerity, and often, quiet anguish. There were sleepless nights, long stretches of prayer, times when he wrestled with decisions that would shape the future of the church and weigh on his conscience for years. He questioned. He listened. He hurt. He smiled through pain and laughed not because things were easy, but because he knew joy was a spiritual necessity. In private meetings, he would pause often to ask questions others wouldn't. He had an uncanny ability to listen not just to what was said, but to what was meant, to hear the trembling beneath the words. Francis's heart was never limited by geography or politics. His compassion extended far beyond the boundaries of the Vatican. He was the pope who washed the feet of prisoners, not as a performance, but as a declaration of dignity. He visited refugee camps and held the hands of those fleeing war. He welcomed the poor and the marginalized into sacred spaces that had long seemed closed to them. For him, the idea of the church as a field hospital wasn't metaphor, it was mission. He understood the power of presence in a world addicted to distance. He stood beside those no one else would. He listened to stories no one else had time for. And through it all, he remained deeply human, sometimes exhausted, often aching, but always faithful. This final stretch of his journey is marked by both serenity and solemnity. He knows the weight of the office, and he knows the fragility of time. His steps have slowed, his voice has softened, and yet his spirit is unwavering. There's a visible lightness in him now, not because he takes things lightly, but because he has learned to carry them with grace. He speaks more reflectively, more poetically. He talks of legacy not in terms of achievements, but of love, of whether he loved enough, listened enough, forgave enough. That's the metric he uses. Not doctrinal scorecards. Not popularity polls. Just love. The private anecdotes from those around him in these final years are as moving as they are revealing. There are stories of him slipping into chapels late at night, praying in the dark. Of him writing notes to grieving parents, sometimes weeping quietly over their tragedies. Of spontaneous acts of kindness, giving away his own coat in winter, offering rides to stranded visitors, calling elderly people who felt forgotten. These weren't grand papal gestures, they were profoundly human ones. And that is what makes this chapter unlike any other. It's a rare thing to watch a global figure of such stature willingly diminish his own spotlight so that others might shine. Francis has done that with intention. Time and again. His critics were not few. Within the Church, he stirred deep discomfort. He spoke out about inequality, environmental destruction, and social injustice. He pushed for dialogue where there had been silence. He welcomed questions where there had been only answers. Some accused him of being too political. Others said he was too lenient. But to Francis, none of this was about politics or leniency. It was about mercy. The mercy of Christ, which he believed should guide every decision, every response. And so, he bore the criticism, not with pride, but with purpose. He knew that real change, the kind that starts in the heart, rarely comes without resistance. Now, as the end nears, whether by resignation or by nature's course, he is not retreating into stillness, but leaning into it. There is power in the pause, in reflection, in allowing the world to witness not just the papacy, but the person. This final chapter does not culminate in declarations or doctrinal fireworks. It ends in silence, in the rustling of leaves in the Vatican gardens, in the flicker of candlelight during private prayers. It ends where it began, in humility. And yet, in this quietness, something profound remains. Francis's legacy is not a set of reforms or a list of controversies. It's the lives he changed, the people he touched, the doors he opened, the conversations he started. It's the belief he rekindled in those who had walked away from faith. The comfort he gave to those crushed by guilt or grief. The dignity he restored to people long silenced by society and even by religion itself. He showed that holiness could be tender, that leadership could be gentle, that truth could walk hand in hand with compassion. As he walks these final steps of his papal path, we are left not with a towering monument, but with a living example. An invitation, not to idolize, but to imitate, to serve with sincerity, to live with mercy, to lead, not with fear or rigidity, but with love. Because that, in the end, is what this story has always been about. Not the legacy of a pope, but the witness of a man, flawed, faithful, and fiercely devoted to the belief that the Church must not just preach the gospel, but embody it. In the final chapter of Pope Francis's journey, we do not see the fall of power, but the rise of humanity. We see that faith, when lived fully, can be as simple as a smile, as brave as a phone call, and as powerful as the act of kneeling to wash the feet of a stranger. This chapter may close, but the echo of his choices, the echo of his love, will remain long after the pages are turned.